Well, friends, I want to share. Let me just set some things up. I want to share a little bit from the Torah portion with you because the Torah portion is called Emor. And in Emor, there is all of these details around holiness and the priests and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. There's a conversation about not just holiness in terms of the people, those priests, the Kohanim, but also holiness relating to festival days and the Sabbath and what to do in the tabernacle, in the tent of meeting, where they believed God would come and there would be this connection point between the people and God. And when I was reading this Torah portion, there's always something that I skip right over. I always read this piece and I find nothing really compelling about it. It doesn't draw me out. It's about the showbread. Showbread is a strange thing. When I think of showbread, I think of my house, and this is how I consider showbread. This is Deborah's recipe from Shannon Sarna, which I think is great. And the showbread had frankincense. Our bread actually has rosemary. And I have to tell you that when it's time for Shabbat, like tonight, to have some wonderful challah is a wonderful thing. And in our house, my wife and my daughters, mostly my wife, sometimes my daughters will make challah. And I know a lot of folks in our congregation make challah. And it's just a wonderful and sweet thing to do. It brings inspiration to my family. And as they've really embraced the practice, even one of my daughters who's in college, she was doing it herself in her apartment. It made me so happy. It brought me such comfort. My mother and grandmother never once made challah, by the way. This isn't like a family tradition. This is something that's being reclaimed on their terms, and it brings a real sense of joy. In the text, the challah that is in the Holy of Holies, the one that is by the menorah, this table that they have, and 12 different loaves of bread. This is the showbread. Now, it used to be spelled S-H-E-W. What it really is lechem panim. It's a bread of faces. Well, that makes no sense. Some will translate it as a bread of presence. I like that, a bread of presence, of being present, not here is a present, that presence of we are here together. Bread was always present in the tent of meeting. Now you would think that maybe it was for God, but everybody knew that God didn't eat it. God didn't need to eat it. They would replace this bread, 12 loaves, every week. And here is an image for you to get a sense of what it is we're talking about. You can see here, you shall take choice flour, bake it 12 loaves, 2/10 of a measure for each loaf. They were all the same. And then you're going to place them on this pure table, this shulchan tahor. It was going to be a table that was unique, special, just for the purpose of holding these 12 loaves. So you're going to have them in 2 rows, 6 to a row. So every week in the tent of meeting, there was this showbread. Why? Now, one can say the idea of other ancient Near Eastern people, they would feed their gods And they would feed them to keep those gods away from them and not hurt them. Well, we want to be closer. We don't want to be so distant from God. So that's not it. It wasn't to feed God. But maybe we have a teaching in the Talmud that says that there was a great miracle about this bread over here. A great miracle was performed in the tent of meeting. The sacred loaves of bread, it says, never grew stale. And I think that's kind of interesting. After a week, the priests were allowed to eat this bread. Only a holy person could eat a holy bread. And because this was part of the tent of meeting, every week, the end of the week, it wouldn't get stale, but the priest would be allowed to eat it. Okay. It was the idea, though, from the teaching that the bread never got stale, that was the miracle. What's so miraculous about that? In Boulder, it wouldn't go stale. There's no humidity. It doesn't grow mold. It would take a long time. I don't know if that was really the issue in the desert, but maybe. What is it really about that it doesn't grow stale? Well, one of my favorite rabbis to read is Harold Kushner, and he, in a commentary, taught that the words weren't supposed to be taken literally. Kushner says they convey the idea that the sanctuary was immune to the process of boredom. It was immune to the process of habit that afflict many religious institutions. Rituals, for Rabbi Kushner, do not grow stale or obsolete there. And I've been thinking about that all day today. Because he says rituals do not grow stale or obsolete there. He did not say rituals do not grow stale or obsolete. So the miracle of the tent of meeting, of the holy tabernacle, once upon a time, is that nothing would be stale there. But out here, on Zoom, in congregations, in synagogues, there is a possibility that something can go stale. And that could be a challenge for us. But there's another link in this conversation. If we have to look at the showbread and that sacred, holy, pure table, and we know that the bread has to be done a certain way, it's all coming from the same batch, but then there are two piles of it, two rows of it stacked on top of each other. They're all going to be the same, but there's 12 of them. One interpretation is that there's a unity of our people because we all come from the same place. And the 12 represents the 12 tribes, 12 different groups. So even though we come from the same stuff, we're not the same. We're all coming from different places. And if that is true, then we're also going to have different needs. And yet the miracle was that ritual doesn't become stale in the tent of meeting. But with all of those tribes and all of those people, there's a possibility of it becoming stale for them wherever they are. Let's look at the text right before this. It says, command to the Israelite people to bring clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lights regularly. It isn't how we talk about a ner tamid. We talk about a ner tamid as an eternal light, one that is always on, like in our sanctuary. But in the Torah, it wasn't eternal light. It was to light it routinely, regularly. I think there's a connection between these ideas. Lighting that menorah and all of those lights regularly and creating these loaves of bread, all from the same batter, from the same resources, from the same source, putting them into rows, differentiating them, representing all of us. So for me, it's unity without being without advancing uniformity. It is consistency, lighting, regularity, routines. But the miracle for them is that the rituals for the tent didn't become stale or obsolete. And there's a lot of people in the American Jewish community who feel that our rituals are stale and obsolete. And I don't blame them. I think I used to. I think if we really are all from the same source and we all are different and unique and part of different groups and communities within our larger community, then we have to work a little extra hard to make sure we are not doing things that are stale, that we are not just saying, come to temple, come to services because you should. That's what I grew up with. And that was a very easy way for me to opt out when I was younger. What wasn't stale for me was the inspiration from certain teachers, rabbis, folks who weren't rabbis, but who could share a message and an insight, the music, the people, and sometimes redefining the ritual. One of the ways that I think it's important to redefine ritual is to reclaim it for ourselves, because ritual expresses something that words can't. Ritual can make us cry like a really good story if it doesn't become rote or stale. So how do we do that? I'm in a tradition business. We have a siddur, something that has an order. That's what siddur means. We go from one prayer to the next, to the next, to the next. If we go out of order, people say, did you know you did that in the wrong place? Now all of a sudden it's wrong. How can we create something, an experience, an encounter, a ritual, whatever it is, something that will be authentic? How can we create an authentic ritual, Jewish or other, that is compelling, that is beautiful? We live in a day where Amazon can make sure we have whatever we want within 2 hours. That's not how I grew up. A lot of us remember what it was like just to dial a phone number and how impatient we would be going through the dial. Or finding a radio station. Or our earliest of TVs with antennas, and you needed to get it just right and maybe stand in a funky position with it in one hand while you were on one leg. I think there are rituals that can be compelling, and they can open incredible encounters. For me, 2 things come to mind, just as an example. A very classic traditional ritual is to bury our dead. I didn't know that. But burying my father when I was 15 years old was one of the most spiritual moments of my life, and I felt I needed to do it instinctively, not because I was told. And that ritual, I think, is really powerful. Not because I'm taking responsibility, but at the time I felt like I was tucking him in. There could be something different that ritual can communicate. Here's another one. Another ritual that I speak of often is how we can reclaim the mikveh. I feel in some ways after this pandemic is over, everybody should find their own time to go to the mikveh and emerge again into life. I don't think we're ready for it yet, but I think there's a power of living water. And while some have used the mikvah, that ritual bath in Jewish tradition, as a power tool, as a way to assert power over women, I also think that it can be incredibly healing. And 2 times I've used the mikvah where I brought somebody, after hundreds of times too, is when somebody's who was a husband, his wife died young. We created a ritual to take off his wedding ring. He was 40, she was 35. She died. We created a ritual after a mourning period to take off his ring. And we brought him to the mikvah so that he would feel ready to begin again. Not to leave her behind, but to begin again. Another time about the mikvah is when I brought somebody who is a veteran and saw combat, and we went to the mikvah together after being home for a week. And he went into the mikvah with me wearing his uniform, and when he left the mikvah, he wore his civilian clothes. Sometimes we need rituals to help with transformation, to express something, to cleanse, for someone who was in battle to repurify, for someone who felt wounded to heal, and to bring sanctification and holiness and love into everything we do. That's what ritual, I think, is really for. It's not about the rules. So can we, and I invite you to put it into the chat, can you do something where you can be open to making Judaism less stale? How do we prevent it from being obsolete? Is it learning? For some. Is it seeking out inspiration, not just rules or laws? The rationale behind some of them, perhaps. Can it be a holy encounter? Can it be a story? What can bring you inspiration? So as some of you perhaps put something in the chat, I will tell you one last story, one of my favorite stories. And it's a short, simple one. Rabbi Israel Salanter is known to be among the leaders and founders of the Musar movement. Musar is a movement that brings ethics into everything they do, kind of a spiritual practice. And we have a lot of people in our congregation who focus in on Musar. And Rabbi Israel Salanter fell sick, and one of his jobs was to make sure that everybody knew how to make matzah kosher for Passover. But as Passover approaches, he wasn't able to do so. And so one of his students comes over, goes to the rabbi and says, what do I need to know to make sure that the matzah is going to be kosher for Passover? And Rabbi Israel Salanter said something very clearly. Even though he was ill, even though he wasn't feeling well, he looked at the student, he says, this is really important. You have to make sure you do this in order for the matzah to be kosher. And the rabbi says, be kind to the baker and make sure she's paid. Be kind to the baker and make sure she's paid. Take care of each other. Let's make a ritual through taking care of each other. Let's make a ritual when somebody is hurting that we call, text, visit, sit outside, let them know that you're there, even if they don't want to come out. Be present. How can we make a ritual of our lives that goes beyond laws and rules so that Judaism and being a human being never becomes obsolete.